The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the cobblestones of Maple Street into mirrors that reflected the warm glow of shop windows. Marcus stood behind the counter of his small bakery, wiping down the glass display case with slow, methodical movements. At 3 feet 8 inches tall, he'd learned long ago to use a step stool for most tasks. But after 16 years of running this place, every motion had become second nature. The bakery was modest, squeezed between a laundromat and a tax preparation office that only opened during filing season. Marcus had named it Small Wonders, partly as a quiet joke about his stature, partly because he genuinely believed that good bread and honest pastries were indeed small wonders in a complicated world. The scent of yeast and butter had seeped into the very walls over the years, creating an aroma that made people pause on the sidewalk, even when they hadn't planned to stop. Tonight, the display case was nearly empty. A few rolls sat in one corner, their crusts still golden, but their freshness fading. On the bottom shelf, wrapped in clear plastic, sat a birthday cake. It had been there for 3 days now. Chocolate with vanilla buttercream, decorated with blue and yellow flowers that Marcus had piped himself, each petal a tiny work of care. The order had been for a child's birthday party. The customer had never picked it up, never called, never answered when Marcus tried to reach them. He'd tried to sell it at a discount, but most people wanted fresh cakes, made for them, not someone else's abandoned celebration. Marcus glanced at the clock. 7:45. He closed at 8 on weeknights. His body ached in the particular way it did after a long day on his feet, the strain settling into his lower back and knees. He thought about his son, David, waiting at home. The boy was 12 now, growing like a weed, already taller than Marcus by half a foot. A neighbor watched him after school, but Marcus knew David preferred the evenings when it was just the two of them, talking about the day over whatever simple dinner Marcus could throw together. The bell above the door chimed, startling Marcus from his thoughts. A small figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the rainy street. For a moment, Marcus thought perhaps a child had wandered in by mistake. Then the figure stepped forward, and he saw her clearly. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her clothes were soaked through, a thin jacket that looked like it had been meant for warmer weather, jeans with holes in the knees that might have been fashionable on another child, but on her simply looked worn out. Her hair hung in wet tangles around a face that was too thin, too pale, with eyes that seemed too old for such a young person. She carried a backpack that sagged with water weight, and her shoes squelched with each step, leaving wet prints on Marcus's clean floor. She stood just inside the door, shivering, water dripping from her clothes and forming a small puddle around her feet. She didn't speak. She just looked at Marcus with those ancient eyes, then shifted her gaze to the display case, to the rolls and the lonely birthday cake. Marcus felt his heart constrict. He'd seen hunger before. He'd known it intimately as a child, before his adoptive parents had found him in the group home where he'd spent his early years. He recognized it in the way the girl's eyes fixed on the food, in the way her thin hands gripped the straps of her backpack, in the way she swayed slightly as if standing upright required all her concentration. "Hello there," Marcus said gently, stepping down from his stool and walking around the counter. He moved slowly, keeping his voice soft. He'd learned that sudden movements could startle people, especially those who'd learned to be wary of the world. "You look cold. Why don't you come in properly out of the doorway?" The girl took a small step forward, then another. Up close, Marcus could see that her lips had a faint blue tinge. Her shivering wasn't just from being wet. This child was profoundly cold, hungry, and alone. "Where are your parents?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. The girl's eyes slid away from his, focusing on the floor. She shook her head slightly. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked instead. The girl's eyes snapped back to his face. She nodded once, a quick jerk of her head, as if afraid the admission would make the offer disappear. Marcus smiled, hoping it looked reassuring rather than sad, though his heart was breaking for this small, wet, hungry child. "Well, I have some things here. Not much left at the end of the day, but let's see what we can find." He walked back to the display case, and the girl followed, her footsteps quiet despite the water in her shoes. She pressed close to the glass, her breath fogging it slightly. Her eyes moved over the rolls, counting them perhaps, or just drinking in the sight of food. Then her gaze landed on the birthday cake, and something changed in her expression. The weariness lifted for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like longing mixed with memory. Her hand came up slowly, one finger touching the glass directly in front of the cake, as if she could reach through and touch those carefully piped flowers. "That's a pretty cake, isn't it?" Marcus said quietly. The girl nodded. Then, in a voice so soft Marcus had to strain to hear it, she spoke for the first time. "My birthday was last week. I'm 8 now." 8 years old. The same age the cake had been meant for, Marcus realized, though he couldn't know that for certain. He looked at this child, standing in his bakery soaked and shivering, and he thought about birthdays, about celebrations, about all the small rituals that marked a childhood, that told a child they mattered, they were seen, they were loved. "Would you—" the girl started, then stopped. She swallowed hard, gathering courage. "Would you maybe have an old piece of bread? Something you might throw away? I have—" She fumbled in her jacket pocket, producing a handful of coins. Mostly pennies, a few nickels, wet and warm from being clutched in her hand. "I have 43 cents. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. This child, this hungry, cold, tired child, standing in front of a birthday cake and asking for old bread, offering her 43 cents for something he might otherwise discard. The dignity in her request, the way she tried to make it a transaction rather than charity, told him volumes about her life, about what she'd learned, about how she'd been taught to make herself small and undemanding. He couldn't speak for a moment. His throat had closed up, and his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall in front of her. She was watching him carefully, and he realized she was used to reading adults' faces, used to looking for the signs that would tell her whether she'd be helped or turned away. Marcus cleared his throat. "You know," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I have a problem. That cake there, the pretty one you were looking at, it's been sitting for 3 days. The person who ordered it never came to pick it up. By tomorrow, I'm going to have to throw it away. It's taking up space, and honestly, it makes me sad every time I look at it because someone should be enjoying it, you know? Someone should be celebrating." The girl's eyes widened. She looked from Marcus to the cake and back again, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. "Now, I was thinking," Marcus continued, moving to open the display case, "that it seems like a real waste to throw away a perfectly good cake. Especially when there's someone standing right here who just had a birthday. Someone who's 8 years old, just like the cake was made for. That seems like fate to me. What do you think?" "I only have 43 cents, the girl whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus pulled the cake from the case, setting it on the counter. Up close, it looked even better than he'd remembered. The frosting still smooth, the flowers still bright, the chocolate layers visible through the plastic wrap promising richness and comfort. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I think 43 cents is exactly the right price for a birthday cake that needs a proper birthday girl to appreciate it. But there's a condition." The girl's face fell slightly, waiting for the catch, the moment when the kindness would be snatched away. "The condition is," Marcus said, "that you have to eat at least one piece here now before you go anywhere. You're soaked through and you're shivering, and I'm not sending a child out into that rain with a cake but nothing warm in her stomach first. Also, I'm going to make you some hot chocolate. Is that acceptable?" The girl stared at him. A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting a clean path through the grime and rain. Then another. Then she was crying in earnest, silent sobs that shook her thin shoulders. She nodded frantically, unable to speak. Marcus came around the counter again, and without thinking about it, without asking permission because some moments were too raw for protocol, he wrapped his arms around this crying child. She was taller than him, even at 8 years old, but she collapsed into his embrace like someone who'd been holding themselves upright through sheer will and could finally let go. Her wet clothes soaked into his shirt, and she smelled like rain and unwashed hair and the particular staleness of clothes worn too many days in a row. But Marcus held her anyway, one hand patting her back in the universal gesture of comfort. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's okay now. You're safe here. You're going to eat, get warm, and we'll figure out the rest. It's okay." They stood like that for a long moment, the baker and the hungry child, while the rain continued to fall outside and the clock ticked toward closing time. Finally, the girl's sobs subsided into hiccups, and she pulled back, wiping her face with her wet sleeve, which only redistributed the moisture rather than drying anything. Marcus guided her to the small table in the corner, where he sometimes sat during slow afternoons, doing paperwork or just watching the world through his window. He grabbed a clean towel from the back room, bringing it to her along with one of his spare work shirts, which would be huge on her but at least was dry. "Bathroom's right there," he said, pointing. "Why don't you dry off a bit and change into this? I'll get that hot chocolate started and cut us both a piece of cake. We'll have a proper birthday celebration, you and me." The girl clutched the shirt and towel, nodding. As she walked to the bathroom, Marcus noticed how she moved, the careful way she placed each foot, as if conserving energy, as if every movement had to be calculated. It reminded him of how he'd moved as a child, before he had enough to eat, before he knew where his next meal was coming from. While she was in the bathroom, Marcus moved quickly. He heated milk for hot chocolate, real hot chocolate made from good cocoa and sugar and a tiny pinch of cinnamon, the way his adoptive mother had taught him. He cut 2 generous pieces of the birthday cake, putting the larger piece on the better plate, the one without chips. He grabbed the rolls from the display case, all 4 of them, and put them in a bag. From his own dinner bag in the back, he pulled out the sandwich he'd planned to eat later, a thermos of soup, and an apple. All of it went into a larger bag. The girl emerged from the bathroom looking slightly less like a drowned creature. Her hair was still damp, but no longer dripping, and Marcus's work shirt hung on her like a dress, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands. She'd folded her wet clothes neatly, holding them in a small bundle. "Just set those by the heater," Marcus said, gesturing to the radiator along the wall. "They'll dry a bit while we eat." She did as he suggested, then came to the table where he'd laid out the feast. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the hot chocolate, at the generous slice of cake, at the casual way Marcus had arranged everything as if this were the most normal thing in the world, sharing birthday cake with a stranger at closing time. "Sit," Marcus said, taking his own seat. The chairs in his bakery were standard height, so his feet didn't quite touch the floor, but he was used to that. He picked up his fork, cutting into his slice of cake. "It's good," he said after his first bite. "I did a nice job on this one, if I do say so myself." The girl sat slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the spell. She picked up her fork with a trembling hand, cut a small piece of cake, and brought it to her mouth. Her eyes closed as she chewed, and Marcus saw her whole body relax just slightly at the taste of sugar and chocolate and butter, at the simple pleasure of good food. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Marcus watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she savored each bite rather than wolfing the food down. She'd learned to make food last, he realized. Learned that you ate slowly because you didn't know when you'd eat again. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently, sipping his hot chocolate. The girl hesitated, then said quietly, Emma. Emma. That's a beautiful name. I'm Marcus. I own this bakery. Have for 16 years now. Emma looked around the shop as if seeing it properly for the first time. Her eyes traced the hand-painted sign behind the counter, the photos on the wall of various cakes and pastries Marcus had made over the years, the small shelf of bread baskets and rolls, the strings of white lights that gave everything a warm glow. It's nice, she said softly. It smells good. Like home should smell. Like home should smell. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus set down his fork, studying this child who talked about home as a theoretical concept rather than a reality. Emma, he said carefully, where do you live? Where are your parents? Emma's hands stilled on her fork. She stared at her cake, and Marcus could see her wrestling with something, deciding how much truth to tell, how much to reveal. I live with my aunt, she finally said, but she's not there much. She works nights, and she has a boyfriend who... Emma trailed off, and something dark flickered across her young face. I try not to be there when he's there. It's better. So sometimes I go to the library until it closes. Or I walk around. Or I sit in the bus station where it's warm. Today I walked too far. And then it started raining. And I was so hungry. And I saw your shop. Marcus felt rage and sorrow warring in his chest. A child, walking the streets to avoid her own home. A child spending evenings in libraries and bus stations because she wasn't safe in the place where she should have been most protected. He thought about David at home, safe and warm, probably reading in his room or playing on his computer, knowing his father would be home soon, knowing he was loved and protected and cherished. Every child deserved that. Every single child. How long has this been going on? Marcus asked, keeping his voice level despite the storm of emotions inside him. Emma shrugged, a gesture that tried for casual but came across as defeated. Since I came to live with her, after my mom... She stopped, swallowed hard. My mom died 11 months ago. Car accident. I didn't have a dad, not one who was around, so I went to my aunt. She's my mom's sister. She didn't really want me, but she's the only family I have. 11 months. Almost a year this child had been living in limbo, unwanted, passed to a relative who saw her as a burden, exposed to situations that no child should face. 8 years old and navigating a hostile world alone. Marcus made a decision then, the kind of decision that changes everything, though he didn't fully realize it in the moment. He just knew that he couldn't let this child walk back out into the rain, back to a situation where she felt unsafe, back to the streets and the bus stations and the cold corners where she tried to make herself invisible. Emma, he said, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you just told me is not okay. It's not okay that you don't feel safe in your own home. It's not okay that you're wandering the streets hungry and cold. None of this is okay, and none of it is your fault. Do you understand that? None of this is your fault. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. She nodded, but Marcus could see she didn't quite believe him. Children blamed themselves. It was what they did, taking on the weight of adult failures and calling it their own. I have a son, Marcus continued. He's 12. Right now he's at home waiting for me. I'm going to call him, tell him I'll be a bit late. Then I'm going to call someone else, someone who can help make sure you're safe. And while we wait, you're going to finish your cake, drink your hot chocolate, and take the rest of this cake home with you, along with some other food. That's what's going to happen. Is that okay with you? Emma looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. What kind of someone? She whispered. Someone whose job it is to keep kids safe. A social worker, probably. Someone who will listen to what you told me and make sure things change. I know that sounds scary, and I know you've probably been told to keep quiet, to not make trouble. But Emma, You deserve to be safe. You deserve to have a home where you don't have to hide. You deserve to have enough food and people who care about you. Will you let me make that call?" Emma stared at him for a long moment. Marcus could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the weighing of risks and possibilities. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Marcus pulled out his phone, first calling David. "Hey, buddy," he said, when his son answered. "I'm going to be late tonight. Something came up at the shop. There's leftover pasta in the fridge. Can you heat that up?" David's voice came through, tinged with concern. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Marcus looked at Emma, who was watching him with those two old eyes. "Everything's going to be okay," he said. "I'll explain when I get home. Love you." "Love you too, Dad." The next call was harder. Marcus didn't have a social worker on speed dial, but he knew who to call. He dialed 211, the community resource helpline, explaining the situation to the calm voice that answered. They connected him to emergency child services, and he explained again, giving them the details, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. Throughout the calls, Emma sat at the table, finishing her cake in small bites, sipping her hot chocolate. She looked exhausted, the kind of tiredness that went bone deep. Marcus wanted to tell her it would all be fine, wanted to promise happy endings, but he'd learned long ago that life was more complicated than that. He could only promise that he'd try, that he'd help, that tonight at least, she wouldn't be alone. The social worker arrived 40 minutes later, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She spoke with Emma gently but thoroughly, asking questions, taking notes, making phone calls. Marcus stayed close, a quiet presence, occasionally interjecting with his observations. "We're going to get you somewhere safe tonight," Patricia told Emma. "A foster home where you can sleep, eat properly, be warm. And tomorrow we'll start figuring out the next steps. Your aunt will need to be contacted, and we'll need to assess the situation more fully. But right now, the priority is getting you somewhere safe. Is that okay?" Emma nodded, looking shell-shocked. She clutched the box containing the rest of her birthday cake, along with the bag of food Marcus had packed for her. Before they left, Emma turned to Marcus. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for the cake. Thank you for seeing me." Marcus knelt down, bringing himself closer to her eye level, even though she was taller than him even now. "Emma," he said seriously, "you are worth seeing. You are worth every kindness, every cake, every bit of help anyone can give you. Don't forget that, okay? No matter what happens, don't forget that you matter." Emma threw her arms around him in a fierce hug, and Marcus hugged her back. This child who'd wandered into his shop hungry and alone, and who he was sending out into another unknown situation. But it would be safer than what she'd known, warmer with more food and more care. It was a start. Patricia gave Marcus her card before they left. "You did a good thing tonight," she said quietly. "Not everyone stops to see. Not everyone calls. You probably saved her from a much worse situation." After they'd gone, Marcus locked up the shop, his movements automatic. He cleaned the table, washed the plates, put away the remaining food. The display case looked even emptier now without the birthday cake. The space where it had sat for 3 days seemed larger somehow, more significant. He drove home through streets still wet from rain, though the storm had passed. The city looked washed clean, reflected lights shimmering in puddles. He thought about Emma, wondered where she was now, hoped she was somewhere warm with a soft bed and someone kind to watch over her. David was still awake when Marcus got home, sprawled on the couch with a book. He looked up when his father entered, and something in Marcus's expression made him sit up straight. "What happened, Dad?" Marcus sat down heavily beside his son. David had grown so much in the past year, shooting up in one of those growth spurts that made Marcus realize his child was becoming a young man. But he was still his boy, still the kid who needed his father, who looked to Marcus for guidance and understanding. "A little girl came into the shop tonight," Marcus said. "She was hungry and cold and alone, so I gave her that birthday cake, the one that's been sitting there, and some other food, and I called someone to help make sure she'd be safe." David listened intently as Marcus told him the story, leaving out the worst details but giving him enough to understand. When Marcus finished, David was quiet for a moment. "Dad," he finally said, "do you think she'll be okay?" "I hope so," Marcus replied honestly. "I really hope so. But sometimes we can't know for sure. Sometimes all we can do is help in the moment we're given and hope it's enough." David leaned against his father, a gesture from his younger years that he rarely indulged in anymore. Marcus put his arm around his son, pulling him close. They sat like that in the quiet house, and Marcus felt grateful. Grateful for this child who was safe and fed and loved. Grateful that he could be here. Grateful that he'd been in his shop when Emma walked through the door. The days that followed were busy ones. Marcus tried to focus on the bakery, on the daily rhythm of mixing dough and decorating cakes and serving customers. But his thoughts kept drifting to Emma, wondering how she was doing, whether the system was treating her kindly, whether she was still hungry, or if someone was making sure she ate. A week after that rainy night, Patricia called him. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "Emma's doing well. We placed her with a foster family. Good people who have experience with kids from difficult situations. She started school, and she's eating regularly. Her aunt agreed to relinquish custody. She admitted she wasn't equipped to raise a child. We're working on finding a more permanent placement for Emma." Marcus felt relief wash over him. "Thank you for telling me. Is there any way I could see her, or send her something?" There was a pause. "That's complicated," Patricia said carefully. "There are rules about contact between people involved in these cases, but I can tell her you asked about her. I think she'd like knowing that." It wasn't enough, but it was something. Marcus thanked Patricia and went back to work, mixing a batch of his honey wheat bread, the kind that took time and attention but always came out perfect when you put in the care. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when the bakery was quiet, the bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up from the cookies he was arranging in the display case and froze. Emma stood in the doorway, but she looked different. Clean clothes that fit properly, hair brushed and pulled back in a neat ponytail, cheeks with a healthier color, eyes that looked a little less haunted. She was holding the hand of a woman in her 40s, blonde and smiling, who Marcus assumed was the foster mother. "Hi, Marcus," Emma said shyly. "Emma!" Marcus came around the counter quickly, and Emma let go of her foster mother's hand to meet him. She didn't hug him this time, too aware of the public space, of the other person present, but her smile was genuine and reached her eyes. "This is Mrs. Chen," Emma said, gesturing to the woman beside her. "She's been taking care of me. I asked if we could come see you, and she said yes." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, offering her hand. "You're Marcus. Emma's told me about you, about what you did for her. I wanted to meet you myself, to thank you." Marcus shook her hand, feeling suddenly emotional. "How are you doing, Emma? Really?" "Good," Emma said, and it seemed true. "I have my own room, and Mrs. Chen makes breakfast every day, real breakfast with eggs and toast, and I go to school, and there's this girl Sarah who's nice to me, and—" She paused, her eyes lighting up. "Mrs. Chen is teaching me how to bake. We made cookies last week. They were pretty good." "They were excellent," Mrs. Chen corrected with a warm smile. "She's a natural, follows directions perfectly, and isn't afraid to get her hands messy." Emma beamed at the praise. Then she looked at Marcus seriously. "I wanted to come say thank you, really thank you, for the cake, for calling someone, for—" She struggled for words. "For seeing me, like you said. No one had seen me in a long time. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. You're very welcome, Emma. I'm so glad you're doing well. You deserve all of this, every good thing. Mrs. Chen said maybe, if it's okay, I could come visit sometimes. When you're not too busy, just to say hi. Would that be okay? That would be more than okay, Marcus said. That would be wonderful. You're welcome here anytime. They stayed for a little while, Emma excitedly telling Marcus about her new school and the books she was reading and the tree in Mrs. Chen's backyard that she liked to climb. Mrs. Chen ordered bread and some pastries, refusing when Marcus tried to give them to her for free. You run a business, she said firmly. I pay for goods and services. But thank you. Before they left, Mrs. Chen pulled Marcus aside while Emma was looking at the display case. I wanted you to know, she said quietly, that I'm filing to adopt her. It's early, and these things take time, but Emma and I connect. She fits with my family. My husband adores her, and our teenage son thinks she's great. I think she's going to stay with us permanently. Marcus had to swallow hard against the lump in his throat. That's wonderful news. She deserves a real home. She does, and she'll have one. Thanks in part to you. That night could have gone very differently if you hadn't helped her, if you hadn't called. You changed her trajectory. I thought you should know that. After they left, Marcus stood in his empty bakery for a long moment, watching through the window as Emma and Mrs. Chen walked down the street, Emma chattering animatedly, Mrs. Chen's hand resting gently on her shoulder. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting everything in golden light. Marcus thought about that rainy night, about a hungry little girl asking for old cake, about the birthday celebration that never happened becoming a different kind of celebration entirely. He thought about small acts of kindness, about how sometimes the smallest gesture at the right moment could change everything. He thought about the space in his display case where that birthday cake had sat for 3 days, taking up room, making him sad. That cake had been waiting, he realized, waiting for exactly the right person, waiting for Emma. Over the months that followed, Emma did come back to visit, sometimes with Mrs. Chen, sometimes with her new family. She always had stories to share, always asked Marcus about David, always left with a treat Marcus insisted she take. He watched her grow, not just physically but emotionally, watched her laugh more easily, watched the shadows leave her eyes bit by bit. On her 9th birthday, Marcus made her a special cake, chocolate with vanilla buttercream, decorated with blue and yellow flowers, just like the one from that rainy night. But this one was fresh, made specifically for her, with her name written in careful script across the top. When Emma saw it, she cried, but they were good tears, happy tears, the kind of tears that come when someone remembers, when someone cares enough to recreate a moment of kindness and turn it into a celebration. They had a party in the bakery after closing, just Emma, her new family, Marcus, and David. They ate cake and laughed, and Marcus watched Emma blow out her candles, watched her make a wish with her eyes squeezed tight and her whole heart focused on that moment. Later, as they were cleaning up, Emma came to Marcus's side. You know what I wished for? She asked. You're not supposed to tell, or it won't come true, Marcus reminded her with a smile. It already came true, Emma said. So I think it's okay. I wished that someday I could help someone the way you helped me. That I could see someone who needed to be seen and be brave enough to do something about it. Marcus hugged her then, this child who'd walked into his shop cold and hungry and afraid, and who was walking out warm and fed and loved. Not because of him alone. So many people had played a part in Emma's story, from Patricia the social worker to the Chens who'd opened their home and hearts. But he'd been there at the crucial moment, and he'd chosen to see, to care, to act. That was all any of them could do, really. Be present in the moments they're given. See the people in front of them. Choose kindness when it costs something. Choose to care even when it's easier not to. Marcus locked up the bakery that night with a full heart. The display case was empty again, all the treats gone to celebrating families and hungry children and people who just wanted something sweet to brighten their day. Tomorrow he'd bake more, and the case would fill again and the cycle would continue. But tonight, he carried home the memory of Emma's smile, of her wish to pay forward the kindness she'd received, of a hungry little girl who'd asked for old cake and who'd received instead a new beginning. The rain had long since passed, but the city still smelled of it, fresh and clean and full of possibility. Marcus drove home through those streets, thinking about small wonders, about the unexpected ways lives intersect and change each other, about birthday cakes that wait for exactly the right person to celebrate. In his shop, in a drawer behind the counter, Marcus kept a photograph. Patricia had sent it to him months after that first night. It showed Emma in her new home, standing in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, wearing an apron that was too big for her, covered in flour, holding a tray of cookies she'd made, beaming at the camera with a smile that lit up her whole face. Marcus looked at that photo sometimes, on difficult days when the bakery struggled or when life felt heavy. It reminded him why he did this work, why he got up early every morning to bake bread and decorate cakes for people he'd never met. It reminded him that small acts of kindness mattered, that seeing people mattered, that sometimes all it took was one moment of genuine care to change a life's entire trajectory. Emma was going to be okay. More than okay. She was going to thrive. And someday, when she was grown, she'd help someone else the way she'd been helped. The kindness would ripple outward, touching lives Marcus would never know, creating more small wonders in a world that desperately needed them. That night, as Marcus tucked himself into bed, he thought about that birthday cake one more time. About how something meant for a celebration that never happened had become the catalyst for a different kind of joy entirely. About how what seemed like waste had actually been purpose, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. He fell asleep thinking about Emma, about David safe in the next room, about all the children in the world who needed someone to see them, to choose them, to remind them that they mattered. He fell asleep grateful for rainy nights and hungry children and the opportunity to be kind when it counted most. The world could be harsh and unkind, but it could also be beautiful and surprising. You just had to keep your eyes open, keep your heart soft, keep your hands ready to help when help was needed. You had to believe in small wonders and the people who created them, one act of kindness at a time, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to witness the miracle of a life transformed, of a hungry child becoming whole, of an old cake becoming the first piece of a new beginning. Those were the moments that made everything else worthwhile. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. What part moved you most? What you felt as Emma's journey unfolded? Your thoughts and feelings matter so much to us here. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something real, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear a story about kindness and hope today. Every like helps us reach more people with stories that matter. Stories about the beautiful complexity of being human. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about these stories as much as we do.